There's a sound you've probably stopped noticing. It drifts through your window just before the light fully arrives. A low, hollow cooing, soft enough to feel like something the morning itself is doing, rather than any living creature. It's been there so many mornings now that it's folded into the texture of your day, the way the hum of a refrigerator or the ticking of a clock eventually disappears into the silence around it. But that sound didn't always come from your yard. There was a time, not very long ago, when that mourning dove wasn't here. It hadn't landed on your fence. It hadn't walked your driveway in that careful, head-bobbing way. It hadn't tucked itself into the corner of your porch railing or settled on the wire above your garden with its feathers pressed tight against the evening chill. There was a specific day, a single visit, when it arrived for the first time. And something about what it found here made it come back the next day. And the next. And then it stopped leaving altogether. You probably didn't notice the moment it happened. Most people don't. But that moment was not random. It was the result of a decision. A real one. Made by a bird most people barely look at twice. And what's even more remarkable is this: the reason it stayed almost certainly had something to do with you. To understand what actually happened the day that Mourning Dove chose your yard, you have to understand what it was doing before it ever arrived. Mourning doves are not impulsive birds. They don't explore the way a chickadee does, bouncing from branch to branch, testing everything, tasting the world with restless curiosity. They don't scan the way a hawk does, sweeping across wide territory looking for opportunity. Mourning doves move through the landscape quietly, carefully, and with a kind of deliberation that most people never associate with them, because most people think of them as simple. They're not. Before a mourning dove settles into a space, it has usually passed through that space several times. It may have flown over your yard days before you ever saw it perched there. It registered the shape of the space, the exposure, the openness. It noticed the height of surrounding structures. It clocked the movement patterns, not just of predators, but of people. And this is the part that changes everything. Mourning doves are remarkably sensitive to human behavioral patterns. Not in the way a crow watches you and learns your schedule. Not with that sharp, calculating awareness. Mourning doves process your presence differently. They read the rhythm of a space. The overall feeling of disturbance, or the absence of it. When a mourning dove flies over your yard for the first time, it is not asking whether there is food. It is asking whether the space feels still. Stillness is not the same as emptiness. This distinction matters more than almost anything else when it comes to understanding why mourning doves choose certain yards and ignore others. An empty yard, no people, no movement, no activity, might seem like an ideal landing spot. But mourning doves don't necessarily prefer emptiness. What they respond to is predictability. A yard where a person comes out the same door at roughly the same time each morning, walks the same path to the car, and leaves, that yard has a rhythm. It may not be silent. It may not be still in the traditional sense. But it has a pattern the dove can internalize. And mourning doves are remarkably good at internalizing patterns. Research into avian spatial cognition has shown that columbids, the family that includes pigeons and doves, possess powerful associative memory. They map not just locations, but the behavioral signatures of those locations. They remember where disturbances happen, when they happen, and how intense they are. And they use this information to construct what behavioral ecologists sometimes call a landscape of perceived safety. Your yard exists somewhere on that map, and the position it holds, safe, neutral, or threatening, was shaped by things you did without thinking about them. The way you close your back door, the speed at which you walk to your garden, whether your dog rushes outside in a burst of chaotic energy or wanders out slowly, whether your yard goes quiet at midday or fills with unpredictable noise. These are not details you would ever think to control. But the dove noticed every one of them. Now here's where it gets deeper. The first time that Mourning Dove landed in your yard, truly landed, not just passed over, it did not commit to anything. It performed what you might think of as a provisional visit. A trial. It likely chose a perch with clear sight lines. Mourning doves almost always do. They prefer elevated positions where they can monitor the ground in multiple directions. A fence rail. A wire. The bare branch of a tree that hasn't leafed out yet. Somewhere they can see the full shape of the open space below them. And then they watched. Not just for cats. Not just for hawks. They watched the yard itself. The way shadows moved across it. The way sound traveled. Whether the ground cover offered both foraging access and escape routes. Whether the nearest dense bush or low tree was close enough to reach in a burst flight if something went wrong. A mourning dove can launch from a standing position and reach speeds of over 55 miles per hour in seconds. But it would rather never need to. It would rather be in a space where that kind of flight isn't necessary. That first perch was a test. And your yard passed. Maybe not on the first visit. Maybe it took 2 or 3 or 4 cautious stops before the dove descended from the wire to the ground. But at some point, it stepped off the perch and walked, on foot, slowly, with that distinctive nodding gait, across your lawn, your path, your driveway. And that ground walk was the real commitment. Because a mourning dove on the ground is a mourning dove that has decided to trust the space around it. What happened next is something only someone paying very close attention would have noticed. And most people weren't paying attention. But the dove was. Once it began ground foraging in your yard, it started tracking the micro-details of your space with a precision that would surprise most people. Mourning doves feed primarily on seeds, small ones, fallen ones, the kind that collect in sidewalk cracks, at the base of garden beds, along the edges of driveways where wind deposits debris. They forage with their heads down, walking steadily, picking up seeds at a rate that can reach nearly 100 per minute when conditions are right. But here's what's quietly extraordinary. They don't just forage wherever seeds happen to be. They return to the same foraging patches within the same yards, often at the same times of day, once they have established that a space is reliable. This means the mourning dove in your yard has not just decided that your yard is safe. It has memorized specific zones within it. The spot beneath the feeder where seeds scatter. The crack along the edge of the patio. The strip of bare ground beside the garden fence. It knows your yard the way you know the layout of your kitchen, intuitively, from repeated use without thinking. And it returns to those zones with a consistency that mirrors routine. That consistency is not accidental. It is the behavioral signature of a bird that has moved past assessment and into residency. There's a word ecologists use that most people have never heard applied to a bird like this. The word is philopatry. It refers to the tendency of an animal to return to, or remain in, a particular location, sometimes for life. Mourning doves exhibit a form of sight fidelity that can persist across seasons. A dove that nests in your yard this spring may return to the same area next spring. Not the same region. The same yard. Sometimes the same tree. Sometimes the same branch. This is not coincidence. This is memory. And when you realize that the mourning dove sitting on your fence this morning may be the same bird that sat there last April, and the April before that, something shifts in how you see it. It's no longer just a dove. It's a returning presence. One that has repeatedly evaluated your space, measured it against every other option in the surrounding landscape, and chosen, again, to come back. What you did to earn that return is the part most people will never fully understand. Because you didn't do anything dramatic. You didn't train it. You didn't lure it. You didn't build a special habitat. You were just consistent. You moved through your own space in a way that the dove could predict. Your patterns became part of the landscape. Your footsteps, your door opening at morning, the engine of your car starting and stopping at familiar intervals, all of it became data the dove used to determine that this space, your space, was stable enough to rely on. And this is where the story turns toward something more personal than most people expect from a bird they've barely glanced at. Because what the mourning dove is responding to is not just your yard. It's responding to the kind of presence you create without trying. The unconscious way you occupy your own space. The pace at which you move through your mornings. The quiet you leave behind when you go inside and close the door. Most of us never think about what our daily patterns look like from the outside. We don't think of ourselves as being watched, evaluated, and remembered by the animals around us. But we are. Constantly. The mourning dove that chose your yard didn't read your intentions. It read your behavior. And over time, it decided that your behavior was something it could build its life around. That's not a metaphor. That is literally what happened. Its nest, if it nested near you, was placed within a zone that your movement patterns defined as safe. Its foraging schedule was shaped around the hours when your yard was most still. Its morning call, the one you've stopped hearing, began at the hour when disturbance in your space was lowest. You set the rhythm. The dove synchronized to it. There's one more layer to this that most people never reach. Mourning doves are not solitary decision-makers. When one dove settles into a space and begins to use it consistently, it sends a signal, not through song, not through display, but through presence itself. Other doves observe which spaces are being used by other doves. A yard that holds one foraging dove becomes more attractive to the next one. Safety, in the dove's world, is partly social proof. So the first dove that chose your yard may have quietly opened the door for every dove that followed. That small group you sometimes see on the wire in the evening, 3, maybe 4 birds sitting in a loose row, soft gray against a dimming sky, that group exists because one bird decided to trust your space first. And the rest followed its lead. You built none of this intentionally. You planned none of it. But your yard became a node in a network of trust that stretches further than you can see. A place that doves pass information about simply by using it, by returning to it, by being calm inside it. And every morning, before you're fully awake, that low cooing outside your window confirms it. The dove is still here. It chose this place. It chose the life it could build around the rhythm you never knew you were offering. And it has no plans to leave.